I have always wanted to refinish a shiny yellow brass snare drum shell with an antique patina. I've never loved the look of a shiny yellow brass snare drum. For some reason, it's just a little too yellow. I like darker and kind of browner metals. I like bronze. I like copper. And they're okay shiny, but even those I really like with an aged kind of patina on it. I think it's just really cool looking. I've just always liked that look. I thought it would be great to use on a snare drum. I've had a couple of drums with this type of shell before, and I never really wanted to risk the potential of ruining the value of the drum if it didn't turn out the way I wanted. But this one is a little different because this drum needs a lot of TLC. If you can tell, this drum's actually kind of egg-shaped. It's definitely ovaled. It's about 14 1/4 diameter on one side and about 13 and like little almost 3/4 the other. It's not round like at all. I don't know how it got that way. It belongs to a friend of mine who gave it to me, not so much to give it to me, but just like handed it off, said, can you do something with this? And I have bent metal shells back into round before. And actually on a video a couple of months ago, I think I got a couple of mentions from someone saying, how do you, I must have referred to it in the video, bending a shell back into shape or something. And they said, how do you do that? Can you show how to do that? Well, I'm going to show you how I do that. And I'm going to do it with this shell. And then when I'm done doing that, I'm going to patina the thing. And I'm going to do it in that order because if I were to patina it first and then do the manhandling, so to speak, there's a good chance I would scratch through the patina, which is only, as I understand, going to be a couple of microns thick, so that's not much. It's, in fact, you could go ahead and just wipe the patina off with some polish and get back to the yellow brass. So it's not a very deep finish, but it looks really, really cool. This drum, by the way, started life as a Tama Artstar ES 8-lug brass snare drum from the early 90s. I don't remember the model number right off the top of my head. PM something, PM 116, PM 216, something like that. It's an 8-lug. I believe it uses the same shell as the nicer 10-lug versions that had better hardware or whatever. But I like 8-lug drums anyway, and if I can get this thing back into round, I think it's probably going to be a cool sounding drum. And if I get to do what I want to finish-wise, it's going to be a cool looking drum. So before I burn any more daylight, I'm going to take the lacquer off this thing. So let's get going. Okay, so here's my beautiful face grimacing as I spray the paint stripper on. By the way, do use gloves. And you can see the lacquer bubbling up around the edge. This is actually the second coat. I had already done one pass. You can see there's not a lot of, other than the edges, there's not a lot of lacquer left on the shell to react. And then after that second coat, you can still see these light sections here. That's where lacquer is. I can feel it with my thumb. The lacquer remains there underneath the hardware. Apparently it didn't get weathered, so it's a little more durable. So I sprayed those. And that left me with a pure brass shell with the lacquer completely gone. Okay, so now that I've got the lacquer off and I'm dealing with just the brass shell, I'm going to go ahead and try to address its out of roundness. And there are a couple of dents too. My first course of action is to bring it basically back into round. Then I'm going to deal with the specific imperfections. Something you got to be careful when you do this. You can't do a lot at once. You need to go slow. Brass is a fairly soft metal. I'm a 200-pound guy. If I lean on this too much, you know, it's gonna yield perhaps, and it could kink the edges, these little fold over bearing edge. You can have some problems with it. So I am, however, going to just generally push it back. Now, for an idea of what I'm doing, here is a drum head, Aquarium Studio X with a power dot, but it won't go on unless I force it. And then I look around the edge and there's a big gap here. Yeah, there's just a really big gap there. So this is kind of flattened a little bit too. The rest is kind of flat over here too. So yeah, anyway, so this is obviously the high point. And one thing to be aware of is that the two edges are different. Like this one, you know, it's not perfect on both sides. Like I can just fix it and it'll fix both sides. This one's going to be a different shape than this one. So I have to kind of work side by side, not just do the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the most egregious narrow pointed part, which is kind of this. And I've got here this is a packing blanket that's folded over several times because I don't want to mark up the brass and, you know, damage it. I want to have something to kind of spread the pressure a little bit and help it to, you know, yield. So I'm going to take this pointed part and put it down here, and I'm just going to kind of take my body weight and just lean on the whole top part of the drum, spreading it out so that it pushes on this but doesn't necessarily push on this, if that makes any sense. So and I'll just rock back and forth a little bit. See, that already made a difference. And I'm mostly just working one side, like I say, at a time. This part's pointed, and I'm probably going to be able to see this better than you are. And I'm just using a rocking motion as I do it, because I don't want to just push and make it flat. Basically, I want to put some pressure on it and roll it, you know, keep it round. Okay, this section is flat because of whatever damage this was from the inside that hit here and here. That pressure out sort of snapped this in somehow. That's not going to be something I can just bend. I'm going to have to actually use a tool, some hardware here in a second to kind of show you how I'm going to do that. Let me just see how the head goes on. It goes on a lot easier. You can still see this is the long spot. I'm just going to check it with measurement here. Yeah, what I'm noticing is this is moving easier than I thought it would. Brass is a soft metal, so I'm not going to put quite as much weight on it because I'm kind of not just bringing it back where I want it. See if I can show you. This dent, this is where the lug was dropped from the outside. Push this in right here. So what I'm going to do, I've got these tools. I've got it's like a hammer and dolly set that I got from Harbor Freight. I'm not going to use this like it's supposed to be used on a brass shell because this is supposed to be used on the raw sheet metal before you finish it. I'm not going to refinish this, meaning if I bang on this with a hammer or something, it's going to leave all kinds of scars and marking. Unlike a car, like a fender, I'm not going to go along and put Bondo on it and sand it smooth and then paint it and do all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to use this like normal, but because I have this, there are a couple of tools in here that I find really useful. That being one. This one I believe will be useful. I'm going to use it a little differently than you might think, even though it is a hammer. This curve, the curve of this is a dolly. It's meant to go behind a panel and then you hammer against it, you know, and mold the sheet metal the way you want. But this curve is roughly the curve of the inside of this drum. Pretty, I mean, it doesn't really move. It's like solid against the shell. So it's a real good match. So when I come along to the dented section, where's the dent? There it is. So when I put this over the dented section, which is pushed in, you can see it doesn't fit. It rocks back and forth. So what I want to do is I want to hammer this thing down and use its form, this is steel, against the brass to push the brass back into shape. But I don't want to scar up the brass. So what I'm going to do is get some masking tape. I will tape over this so that the tape will protect the finish and it won't get all scarred up. And then I can put this on it, and I want to get a different hammer. I don't need to use that hammer. Get a real hammer. And I'm hitting right over the lug hole, directly over the lug hole. So I'm just kind of moving it around. Finding the raised spots. Wow, it's a lot better. Brass is soft. You don't have to go nuts. Wow, that is a lot better. So there it is now. You can still see the damage, but it's really just those corners. And then right there beside the holes, I'm gonna see if I can maybe bring that out just a skosh more. Get that raised section right there. A lot better. A lot. All right, so this little recess thing at the top here, I'm gonna have to work from the inside. Again, I'm gonna tape this. I've got the tape in here. And what I'm gonna do is take this shape right here and I'm gonna tuck it up in there, pointed in such a way that I can then tap this hammer. So I can tap this hammer with this hammer and push the flat out a little bit. Okay, so there's still a little bit, but it's not horrible. Let me check the drum head again. Yeah, that's pretty good. And this is the side that was problem. God, that's really good. A little bit snug. Dare I? Yeah, I dare. Yeah, that's pretty easy. Okay. So this other side, and that's still really good. Okay, so that's about it. I'm about ready to test this shell. Do the bearing edge test on my granite counter in my kitchen. So let's go to my kitchen and do a quick light test. I don't expect it'll be perfect, but I do expect it will be very respectable. So the edges actually look pretty good. That's the bearing edge. And then here's the snare side, which you can actually see the snare bed right there, that sort of wider raised portion. That's the strainer side. And then the bottom edge, and we've got more snare bed on the other side. And then I proceeded to severely soap this thing up with dishwashing detergent, trying to degrease it, get all the grease off down to the bare brass so that it can chemically react when I try to patina it. Any grease is going to keep it from doing that. So now this shell is round. It has been stripped of lacquer. It is totally clean of grease or anything, so it's ready to be patinaed. I went to the store today and got 3 things for this. 1, a tote that's large enough to hold the shell with a lid on. 2, white vinegar, which is going to be the chemical agent that's going to be aging this. And 3, a bag of frozen burritos. These are optional, but this may take a few hours to do it, so you might get hungry, so, you know. So what I'm going to do is set up a raised platform inside the tote that the shell's going to sit on, and I'm going to fill the bottom with vinegar, and I'm also going to sprinkle some salt in there. Now the salt, I've seen different videos and read different articles, and some people use salt with white vinegar to patina brass, and some do not put the salt in. They just use the vinegar. It appears to me that the salt is a little bit darker and just looks a little bit more antique the way I want, whereas the vinegar only seems to top out at a sort of a foggy and slightly a darker look. But I kind of like the pictures of the ones that had salt in them, and I don't know if that was just that particular piece or that particular time of doing it, or if it actually has something to do with the salt. But I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to put some salt, just kind of sort of liberally sprinkle some salt in the vinegar, and I'll just keep checking it until it looks about like what I want. So after 2 hours, I decided to flip it over because I didn't want one edge to be closer to the vinegar and being more patinaed than the other. And I stirred the solution while I was at it. Some people were saying to stir it every few hours to make sure that it's still chemically reacting. I don't know if that's legitimate or not, but sure, why not? And after 5 hours, you can see there's sort of this green kind of oxidation looking stuff that's starting to form in sections. But I wanted to flip it again and stirred it again while I was at it. So want to make it as even as possible all around the drum by flipping it every couple of hours until it's as dark as I want. And 8 hours was done at this point. So I'm just pulling it out. Hold it up for the camera here. You can kind of see what's going on. Look at all that green stuff. And a little drip spot there that didn't react quite the same way. Don't know what that's all about. So here's what it looks like. Couple of observations. Firstly, the green oxidation looking stuff, when I first took it out of the tank, that came off immediately as soon as I ran it underwater. This outside here is extremely shiny, very polished, which the brass was even without the lacquer. And so I guess that's probably why I, for some reason, was expecting it would be a little bit more of a matte finish. But now that I think about it, the videos that I saw where they were doing this to some brass items, I think the brass was already kind of had a matte finish. So the finish quality didn't change, just the color of it did. So this really is kind of cool looking. Very cool looking, actually, and the randomness of it's kind of almost got like a marbled effect, or it's just, I don't know, really, really cool. This is weird. Don't know what dripped, but clearly something, whether that was on the shell, something that had maybe reacted with the brass, who knows, some time ago. But anyway, it looks super cool. I think it's going to be great once I put chrome hardware on it. So let's do that. Put some hardware, some fresh heads and wires, and see how it sounds.